If you're new to our channel, we'd love to have you join our little community. Just hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications. We promise it will be worth your while.
The girls had their little office gossip to share. I listened in and exchanged what I heard around when I was walking around the office delivering things to the attorneys. I heard nothing about my wife from the girls, and that made me happy. There was no talk of an unhappy marriage or revenge, so that was a relief. The girls talked about movies, celebrities, and reality television shows. I bluffed my way through it at first, but I used the internet to educate myself on it, and I was able to eventually stand my ground with them. I had to because the men didn't care for my opinion about guy stuff. As I brought back a drink I fetched for one of the lawyers, he was talking with another about baseball. I loved baseball. I knew more than those idiots did about it. I chimed in with my take on a recent game. All I got was patronizing looks and a nice girl type of brush-off as if I was out of my league talking about sports. Despite being frozen out of guy talk, I got along with the attorneys at the place. I had never taken any interest in my wife's work and had never met her coworkers before. They were nice to me and all the other girls. They weren't trying to sleep with any of us. That helped me. I think there was some unwritten policy against the firm. At least that's what the other girls told me. Maybe they were just rationalizing why none of the guys asked us out. Anyway, the belief in the existence of that policy helped my confidence in my looks and helped the other girls. I did good work. I wasn't surprised about that. I knew what were good sources and what weren't. I knew how to whittle it down for them. I first found it demeaning to bring them cups of coffee or pick up their lunches every once in a while. But I began to realize it was more productive for me to do it for them rather than have them waste their more valuable time with it. I was the support staff. I had to accept my role for the time being, and I did. My life at home was changing too. Every day I worked at the office, I felt I was becoming more and more the lady of the house. I felt the urge to take care of Amy as the main breadwinner. She was paying the bills, and I felt she should not be troubled with trivial stuff around the house. It was my way of feeling that I was finally pulling my weight again. After that first day at work, I started taking my own car. I was more often than not getting out of work well before her. She was working long hours. I started to use my extra hours to clean the house. I got to make dinner every night and had it ready for when she came home. I even learned how to cook a few things I knew she loved. As I fell into a more traditional woman's role in the home, I even found myself wearing progressively more girly clothing at home. I started out in a t-shirt and jeans when I was cleaning the house, but soon I found myself in the light blue tracksuit Amy bought me to lounge around in. I didn't think anything of it until I eventually realized I was cleaning the house. It was not a pleasant realization that I was becoming my mother. I know many women fear it, but I was a man. At least I still thought I was. It didn't help that Amy had taken to calling me girl in an effort to be cute. I still hoped I was a man. I knew I used to be, but I wasn't sure what I was anymore. I knew I kept catching myself thinking of my coworkers as the other girls. If I was thinking of myself as one of the girls, I wondered what Amy thought. Anyway, Amy loved my taking on a more traditionally womanish role. I was doing her errands to save her time. I was picking up her dry cleaning on my way home. I was grocery shopping. I was doing all this, and other shopping for her as well, all while dressed as a woman. That was my life. I was dressed as a woman every waking hour. My nails and hair kind of prevented me from going out in men's clothing without getting any glances. I was also giving Amy more attention than I had since we were dating. I was asking how her day was. I was actually listening to her answer. We actually had a relationship based on communication again. I found myself trying to meet her needs. I even found myself doing the unimaginable. I went down on her, and she did not return the favor. She just thanked me and went to bed. Then it happened again and again. It was all about her needs and wants, and I was enabling it. Meanwhile, I had kept trying to get an interview for a job as a lawyer, but it was not fruitful. I sent resumes, but all I got in return was no reply. I called up some of the firms trying to show some initiative, but all I got was impolite brush-offs that I wasn't what they were looking for. I tried not to take it personally, but one secretary I spoke to said words stuck with me. As I said who I was, she snickered. At first I figured that Mr. Rossum had gotten to the firm, but that was not it seemed to be. She said to me, "I'm sorry, sis, you're not what we are looking for at the moment." I was dumbfounded as she hung up. Had my voice really become that womanly that she thought I was a woman? I was sure she said sis, not sir. Sis, like I was a feminist sister in arms. That pretty much ended my job search. I could take rejection, but I couldn't take people linking my name to what they thought was a girl. I may have had nothing important, but I still had my reputation as a man's man. I couldn't help wanting to keep that reputation from being diminished by the girlish creature I had become. Besides, I had accumulated my new position and got great reviews from everyone at work. All the lawyers, including Amy, complimented my work. About 2 weeks into my job, one of the partners pulled me aside. Mr. Henry said he needed a paralegal to come with him while he talked business with a lawyer representing someone we were suing. I was fine with it. Not like I thought I had the choice to tell him I wouldn't go anyway. I asked, "So where are we meeting him?" Scores. My face dropped as the name of the strip club I once frequented reached my ears. Mr. Henry read my displeasure and said, "I know you girls don't like to go to those places, but it's business. It's where Louis wants to hash out a deal. Please don't take any offense by it." "I don't," I said. Mr. Henry responded, "Good girl. Now please know that I personally oppose strip clubs. They're demeaning to women everywhere." I smiled as if I believed him. I knew his reputation. The dirty old man probably requested the meeting spot just like I used to. I headed down to Scores with Mr. Henry and an associate named Mr. White. Mr. Henry paid my cover charge and his own. I smiled knowingly as the bouncer was on a first-name basis with Mr. Henry. We sat at a table and awaited the opposition. I caught Mr. Henry's eyes darting lustily at the women on the pole. I couldn't blame him. They were hot. I had to consciously remember that I was a woman. My little guy was fighting against the gaff that Amy bought me. He wanted to come out, but he was restricted to between my legs. I thought back to the dozens of times I put dollar bills in that stripper's G-string. She wasn't the one I was concerned with. I was concerned with Crystal, my favorite girl to get a lap dance from. She was looking in my direction. I wondered if she recognized me. That would be just what I needed to be exposed as a crossdresser at strip bar. As she was walking over to our table, the opposition showed. It was the esteemed Mr. Kritikos. I smiled politely as I stood to greet him and sat back down. Crystal reached us not long after. I put my head down ashamed. I figured I was about to be exposed, but she just offered the boys a lap dance. They politely refused. It was business, they said. I was relieved to know that I was just another face in the crowd to her. I guess it was pretty stupid to think she'd recognize me. She probably danced to thousands of men. I was just one horny, desperate loser among the scores of other men that had passed through. I wasn't just one of them, Mr. Kritikos. I realized my role there quickly. Mr. Kritikos probably requested scores. He was just like Mr. Henry, a dirty old man who got his kicks leering at young women. Unfortunately, in his eyes, I was one of them. I felt him rubbing his foot on my leg. At least he took off his shoe, because if that man had caused a run in my pantyhose, I would have slapped him. He was handsome, but he was loathsome. He wasn't the toady-looking Mr. Henry. He had something attractive about him. Something that made my ever-increasing female side realize his appeal to women. I knew that women probably threw themselves at him in the way that Mr. Henry could only wish, and I could only recall. There was Mr. Kritikos, everything I was on the path to become before I threw it all away on the wrong girl. If he knew he was trying to pick up a chick with a dick, he'd probably lose it all too. The old boys club doesn't care much for fags. Mr. Henry and Mr. White paid no attention to me. I was a pretty ornament there, just like the strippers, to help disarm Mr. Kritikos. After 2 hours of feeling Mr. Kritikos' occasional touch of my leg and the lustful look in his eyes, my bosses struck a deal with him. It seemed favorable to our side, so that made me happy. Almost as happy as the knowledge that we could leave. As we left, Mr. Kritikos shook my boss's hands before he embraced me. He pressed his body up against mine. I could feel the erection in his pants. I wanted to puke. I had done the same thing to women. He let me go and asked if I'd like to have dinner sometime. I politely refused, explaining that I had a boyfriend. He countered that he had a wife and asked, "Why should it stop either of us?" Now I was really sick to my stomach. I was this disgusting creature before me. He was who I was, just 2 decades older. I fought my urge to bitch slap him and thanked him for his interest in me, but I explained I was a faithful girl. I figured one more lie couldn't hurt. Mr. Kritikos nodded understandingly, and I was sent off to the other men with a slight pat on the behind. Mr. White looked alarmed, but laughed as if to implicitly say, "Don't sue us for sexual harassment." Mr. Henry didn't see anything wrong with it. I knew there was. I knew there was when I was a guy. But that was my generation, though. I wasn't bringing a lawsuit, though. What would I say? I dressed as a girl, but I'm a guy, and this guy manhandled me because I looked like a girl. Yeah, that would be the kind of press I wanted. A little over a week later, another paralegal was joining the staff. I was eager to meet her. I knew I wouldn't know any new lawyer brought in because it wasn't my field, but there was no guarantee that I wouldn't know the paralegal. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the new paralegal's face. It was Karen, my former mistress. I thought to myself, did my wife know, or was she not involved in this? I kept wondering. I wondered if she didn't know, but wanted to humiliate me by hiring someone from my old job. Anyway, I wasn't in a position to wonder for long. The HR lady walked over to us and said, "This is Karen. She's 8 years of experience as a paralegal. That's more than all you girls except Sherry. As such, we have given her a position as one of our coordinating secretaries who will make sure you girls are optimally used." Karen personally introduced herself to all the girls before she said a word to me. She smiled as she looked me in the eye. "So, Mr. Rossum really did a number on you. Please, Karen, keep that quiet. Why don't you tell me what happened?" I told her everything, from when I was fired, to when I couldn't get a job, to when my wife got me a job as an office girl. She soaked it all in with a smile and said, "I have to tell you I'm impressed." "Why?" I managed to ask in spite of my humiliation. "You've really taken to this role. I heard great things about you. You're really working out. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. You were a good lawyer, so I guess you'd have to make an excellent paralegal. I just wouldn't have guessed." "Guessed what?" "That your legs would look so good in a skirt, girl." "Thanks," I managed to say, blushing like a schoolgirl. She smirked at my response and seemed to revel in the way I seemed to be twisting in the wind before her. "You're welcome. Now get back to work. We're not paying you to sit around here gossiping about your life and doing nothing of value, Missy." "Yes, ma'am," I said instinctively. I almost bit my tongue as I said it. I was calling my ex ma'am in addition to my wife. How had I sunk so low? I was her superior, now I was her inferior. I was my wife's equal, now I was beneath her. I was below all of the women in my recent life. A week passed before I thought that my wife may have found out about my affair with Karen. I was doing my normal research work for one of the attorneys as Karen ordered me to do that day. While I was collecting information for the attorney to form an argument from, I heard Karen laugh. I turned and saw her next to Amy, who was smirking. At that moment, I began to wonder if my new life was nothing but a ruse meant to amuse them, but they quickly separated. I figured it was not about me. It was probably something unrelated. I continued to work until lunchtime, when Amy called me into her office. Amy sat me down at her desk as she shut the door. She sat behind it in her large executive chair, while I sat on her smaller guest chair. With my knees close together, I perched myself on the edge of the chair. I knew she was my wife, but I had just gotten used to not being comfortable sitting across from the attorneys. I always felt inferior ever since becoming a legal secretary. But that was not what was bothering me then. My man-woman's intuition was warning me that something was amiss. Amy smiled at me and said, I know about Karen. I could feel my face fall white. My stomach plummeted. I tried to play dumb and said, "No what?" Amy shook her head, laughed and said, "That you had an affair with her." I gave up at that moment and asked, "She told you?" "No, your old boss called and told me you were sleeping with her and his wife." "When did he do?" "The day before he fired you." "Listen, Amy, You can't explain," she said firmly in a calm voice. Her face and voice had a no-nonsense feel to it. I tried to crack it and said, "You're right, I'm so sorry. If I could..." "You would have done it again if you didn't know how it'd all turn out. You're a dog. I always suspected it. I was never as blind as you thought." "I should have known that." "Yes, you should have," she interjected. She was right about me. I was a dog. I was like Mr. Criticos. I was like Mr. Henry. I would sleep with anything in a skirt with breasts. "I have to ask," I said. "Go on. Why didn't you divorce me if you knew?" "I'm not a quitter, you know that. You also know I always felt that a good woman can change a man, and I feel I did." As I crossed my legs and felt the soft embrace of my tights on my hairless skin, I couldn't help but nod in agreement with her assessment. I was changed. I wasn't a man anymore. I only had one woman in my life and no prospects for another. It's not like there's a wall of women looking to score with men dressed as women, so they can work in a law firm as a paralegal. I might be able to attract a man, but that's not really the point of where I'm going with this here. She continued, "I've kept you here. I've monitored you, and I have to say I see real improvement." "How?" "Well, I've seen improvement in your behavior. You're far more devoted to me. As far as keeping you here, I took some pictures of you recently and sent them to your prospective employers. The HR girl used your real social security number and name too, but that's just between me and her, and anyone who looks at your work history." My eyes bugged out. I realized why I was getting those brush-offs and snickers. They knew. That secretary knew. I wasn't her sister in arms. I was a sissy to her. Amy had rendered me unemployable in a large chunk of the local job market. I felt betrayed, as I'm sure she must have when her fears about me were confirmed. I asked somewhat hopefully, "You want me here?" "Yes," she replied with sincerity. That was a relief. Our prenuptial agreement gave 75% of marital assets to the spouse that did not cheat if adultery was the cause of the split. I could start anew with 25% of our assets. It would be easy, but I knew she'd drag it out if I betrayed her again by leaving her. It'd be on the public record for employers to find on background checks that I'd been prancing around as a secretary beneath her. I was trapped. She had me right where she wanted me. I was a paralegal now, not a lawyer. That stage of my life had passed. She broke the silence between us. She said, "I like having you around. I can watch you and make sure that you don't stray. Not that you would anyway. I mean, it's not like there's a long list of women dying to be with someone like... Well, let's just say now I know you're all mine, and I'm all you got.